Here, homeless, he lives in a box in an alley.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Before we start our video, I'd like to take a moment to talk about Sam Kieth, the creator of the Maxx. He passed away on March 15th, 2026 at the age of 63 years old. He'd been battling Lewy body dementia for several years, which is a condition that has signs of both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. He passed away in his home in Sacramento and is survived by his wife Kathy, who has been his loving partner for 4 decades. He was an inspiration to all of us. He didn't want a memorial service, and instead, his family made donations to the Hero Initiative, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and the Lewy Body Dementia Association. We know him as one of the most amazing creators ever in the comic book circle, but Sam Kieth always doubted himself. Jim Lee later wrote that Kieth, whom he recruited himself, was sweet and kind. He was a very humble man, and he genuinely believed that he would never be able to do what the Image founders did. But that's where he was wrong. He did do something that nobody else could do. He gave us the Maxx, a character that is so visceral and yet lovable that once you see him, you'll never forget it. So, this is for you, Sam Kieth. When you open the comic book of the Maxx, you'll be confused, because things just bleed into one another from the get-go. But with time, you soon realize that Maxx operates on 2 realities at the same time, and you, dear reader, have to keep up with both. You have the real world, where we follow this large purple-clad man who lives in a cardboard box. He is the Maxx. He has huge yellow claws and buck teeth that jut out with a yellow stripe that's painted in the middle of his face. Overall, if you look at his general shape, he looks like a hulking figure that's a result of one too many steroid injections, if you catch my drift. He smells bad, he watches cartoons, and he doesn't know who he was before he woke up in the box. The one thing he does know is that Julie Winters, this social worker, is very important to him. Does he know why? No. And as far as Julie's concerned, she's a freelance social worker. She keeps bailing Maxx out of jail because more often than not, Maxx goes to save someone in their crime-riddled city, only to be caught by the police. He's considered a delirious man, and Julie sees him as that too. She takes care of him though, because that's what she's supposed to do. But this is not the only world of these 2 characters. Then you have the Outback. This is this primitive-looking Earth, which seems straight out of the Flintstones. And in this reality, the Maxx is anything but a delirious vagrant. He's a protector, sworn to serve the Jungle Queen, who, as you can tell, is none other than Julie. At first, it seems like the Outback is a separate dimension, but as you watch more and more of the world unfurl, you realize that this is Julie's subconscious. Something horrific happened to her, and to cope with that, she created this world. And because of some accidental linkage, the Maxx ends up existing in both worlds. I'll tell you all about it, but wait, there's another key player I have to tell you guys about, and that's Mr. Gone. He's the villain of the show, and this is where things get really complicated. He's a serial rapist and a murderer who seems to have some kind of supernatural ability. He looks like Jafar from Temu wearing rags if I squint hard enough. And he is so condescending. He always speaks in a philosophical way, which genuinely gets on my nerves at all times. He also comes with these black bobs with mouths and hands but no eyes called the Izzes. He shares this telepathic link with Julie that she knows nothing about. Mr. Gone knows what went down between Julie and the Maxx and why the Outback exists, and why the Maxx cannot remember anything about himself. And instead of helping them, Mr. Gone toys with them because, where's the fun in being helpful? The series begins with the first issue that came out in March of 1993. The first issue opens in the city. We see a beautiful woman in red who's dropped off by the cab driver 3 blocks before her stop. So she starts walking toward her destination, and behind her back, in the dark, are 2 goons, Tigo and Fridge. Their whole shtick is to beat up people who are dropped off by the cab driver and take their money. The cab driver does it for 1/3 of the payout. Overall, this is a business, not a one-time thing. But thankfully for her, the Maxx is there. But in his attempt to save the woman, he gets arrested by the cop, who conveniently forget about the woman who's in a dark corner of the alley. And there, she's apprehended by none other than Mr. Gone. Mr. Gone knows about what's happening because he's been keeping an eye on the Maxx and Julie. So, of course, just to send a message in a way, he tortures the woman in red. In the meantime, as Julie gets the Maxx out of jail, Mr. Gone gives her a call. He says some ominous and perverted crap to her, which obviously Julie ignores because why wouldn't she? The Maxx keeps talking about how the woman he was trying to save got raped, but Julie doesn't listen. In her eyes, the Maxx is a delirious guy who shouldn't take the blame for things that are not in his control. But we, the audience, already know better. We know that somehow, somewhere, all three of them are connected. In the first issue, we get this moment of the Maxx walking through the outback, only for the whole visual to shift in a matter of a second, leaving both him and us completely disoriented. Not only that, but we also get a moment of Mr. Gone attacking a young girl named Glory, which is genuinely horrifying to watch. But it must be done. And now we know just how dangerous this man can be. Then we have the second issue, where Gone's threat keeps escalating. From his words, you can tell that this man knows something that Julie needs to know. He speaks to her in a way that suggests he knows more about her than she does, and Julie keeps brushing off his statements, assuming that he's just another phone pervert. But then, at one point, Mr. Gone gets all villainy on, and Julie encounters one of his physical manifestations. She gets caught, and he ties her up in this weird BDSM fantasy way. Instead of sitting there and just taking it, Julie comments on it. Julie starts psychoanalyzing Mr. Gone, much to his chagrin. Mr. Gone retaliates by pushing Julie to remember things about her, but Julie refuses to slow down. Instead, she cuts off his head. Well, his physical manifestation's head, which is really funny because he keeps talking. This decapitated head ends up becoming an important plot point for the lore. It keeps returning over and over again. While Julie and Mr. Gone are having their little word battle, the Maxx is out there, having his very real battle with the Izzes on behalf of the Jungle Queen. He comes out on top, but this only gets Mr. Gone angrier and angrier. The next issue opens with the Maxx dealing with an Izzes problem. We also learn about the Outback Slug that can jump a lot but can't land properly, and Crabbit, its natural predator. We watch the Maxx as he goes back and forth between the two worlds, trying to piece together who he is, why is he here, what is his role, and other important pieces of information that he for some reason doesn't have. Then, eventually of course, he comes across Mr. Gone. Mr. Gone captured him and they get to chatting. Mr. Gone says the word mommy, and something immediately changes in the Maxx. Mr. Gone tells him that he knows everything about Julie and who she was before she became who she is. And he also knows who Maxx was before he became the Maxx, and what he hides underneath that mask. The Maxx is understandably confused by it all and pressures Mr. Gone to open up. This is where we learn that Julie was actually an architecture student. She was beaten and raped after she tried to help a homeless person. Once she came out of the hospital, she used all her money to set up this freelance social worker thing to keep helping people. But it's clear that this is just her copium. She doesn't actually want to help herself, so she keeps helping others while building a wall around herself. The Maxx tries to talk to her, but Julie brushes him aside. Mr. Gone tells the Maxx that Leopard Queen and Julie are the same person, and the Maxx has to figure out a way to save Julie. Julie is getting lost in the city, and they need her to come back. In the fourth issue, we meet Sarah. Sarah is a young girl, an aspiring writer who has issues. More specifically, daddy and mommy issues. See, her father used to work a normal office job, but one time he got mad at his boss and showed up at the office with a rifle. He mowed everyone down and left. Since then, Sarah's mom has become extremely overbearing. She shows up to speak with Sarah whenever she can, asking and begging for her daughter to validate that she's a good mother and that Sarah would never ever leave her. But you know what happens to kids of these kinds of parents? The kids leave the moment they get a chance. Sarah is exactly like that. Sarah mixes with bad guys like Jimmy, who also comes from a horrid family. And Jimmy, one day, comes across none other than the Maxx. And he told the story about the Maxx to Sarah. And Sarah's mom, who's worried about her, suggests she go and talk to Julie about her mental health. Sarah at first refuses because, Julie's not a real therapist or a real social worker. She's just her mom's friend. But eventually, Sarah comes around to it once she sees the Maxx beat up some carjackers when she meets Julie and the Maxx outside a movie theater. But unlike Julie, Sarah is a realist. She takes everything with a grain of salt and wants everything to make sense. When she heard the Maxx mention something about her father, Sarah just had to stick with the duo to make sense out of everything. We also learn how Jimmy betrayed Sarah just for the sake of popularity, which left Sarah completely devastated. At one point, Sarah started to carry a gun, which is her father's gun. And why's she carrying it? She wants to shoot her dad with it, of course, and Sarah talks about it to Julie. As for Mr. Gone, he starts talking about details about Julie's childhood that there is no way a random phone pervert could know. It's clear that Mr. Gone is someone who knows Julie very closely, and the sooner she accepts it, the better. We start to see Maxx push back against the limits of what he knows about himself. He wants to know who they are and how they're connected. But as they start spending more and more time together, we can see an unlikely friendship blossoming between Maxx and Julie. Sarah also starts to hang out with them, and eventually, Sarah witnesses the Izzes and their strangeness in full glory. Seeing it, Sarah pulls out a gun on Julie and Maxx. Her reality starts to crack, and those cracks start to show. While all of this is happening, Gone is slowly gaining the upper hand. He starts to push Julie to her limits as much as he can. Their telepathic bond stretches and broadens. At one point, we actually see Mr. Gone talk about the Outback in detail, which is strange, because doesn't the Outback belong to Julie? Then how does he know so much about it? And why is he able to navigate to the Outback so freely? Something about this whole thing doesn't feel right. All these small details make it kind of hard to ignore that maybe, just maybe, Gone is not an outside threat. He and Julie have a connection that goes beyond it. As Maxx keeps fighting against Mr. Gone, trying to find a way to save the Leopard Queen, we know more about the Outback. Turns out everything here is a herbivore, which is an insane thing to know. But that definitely makes the rereads entertaining. And the white Izzes in the Outback, they become black when you bring them to the real world. And this is where all the psychological metaphors that Kieth had been drawing become clear. See, trauma is manageable in one context, but when you take the context out and replace it, that same trauma becomes hard to handle. The coping mechanism that kept you safe when you were a child might not be the one keeping you safe now as an adult. And Kieth depicted that beautifully with those Izzes. But wait, there's more. As we start to explore more and more of the Outback, we start to realize that there's a real-world correlate to the place. And everything started from Julie's childhood. So it turns out when Julie was a young child, she came across this rabbit that was hit by a car in front of her house. Being a helpful child, she brought the rabbit home, hoping that she would be able to heal everything by giving it love and care. Julie's mother is someone who always got the job done, while Julie's father liked being the good dad, but didn't really do much of the good dad deeds, if you're catching my drift. Now, Julie kept the rabbit under her bed, and whenever the rabbit would move its leg, there would be a scratching sound that would haunt Julie. And of course it did. That is a mangled rabbit slowly dying under her bed. Even if she doesn't understand the concept of death, she understands that things aren't going the right way, right? And then, eventually Julie just wants the sound to stop. And again, I cannot blame her for that at all. But that's a bad thing, right? Because the only way the rabbit would stop making that sound is by dying. And that means Julie's wishing death upon it, no? Well, this is where her mother comes into play. She saw the rabbit's terrible condition and decided to put it out of its misery by bludgeoning it with a shovel. And, unbeknownst to her, Julie witnessed the whole thing. This incident broke something in Julie. She saw how purity, hopefulness, and love cannot really work when you have an external force that is violent enough to break down all the barriers. And this was the moment Julie realized that care and loss are inseparable. And sometimes when you love something, you have to let go, because otherwise, your love will be the one thing to kill it off. And that rabbit ended up becoming Julie's spirit animal. Maxx, who's linked to Julie, starts to think that maybe under the mask, he's a rabbit's head. Although he doesn't know why he has this irrational fear, we, the audience, can put two and two together and figure out that maybe, in a way, Maxx is something or someone that Julie really wanted to save but couldn't. Now, this memory, as you can guess, is super important for Julie to understand who she is and where she comes from. But Mr. Gone doesn't want her to access this memory. Why? Well, here's the thing. Mr. Gone is Uncle Artie, Julie's father's friend. He would often visit Julie when she was young and tell her stories about Australia. The Outback is literally based on the stories that Mr. Gone told her back in the day. And obviously, if she remembers the rabbit memory, she'll remember Uncle Artie. And we don't want that. And while we're dealing with all of this, we start to realize that, wait, Outback is not something uniquely Julie's. Sarah has one too. While hers isn't as fleshed out as Julie's, it's definitely there. Which means Sarah will also have her very own spirit animal. Mr. Gone pushes the Izzes to attack Maxx and Julie more and more in the real world. And being the protector that he is, Maxx keeps fighting back. However, he knows that he has to bring Julie to the Outback inevitably. She's the key to it all. And if she doesn't accept and heal her relationship with her inner self, then things will not work out. Finally, at one point, Maxx brings Julie with him to the Outback. While he's being chased by the Izzes, Julie wanders off on her own, and she starts to recover her memories slowly. And this is where Julie finally realizes that she and the Jungle Queen are the same. You would think that this would be the end of it, but that's not quite how Kieth writes his stories. We also see that the reason Julie keeps cutting off Mr. Gone's head is that when she was a kid and the whole rabbit fiasco was happening, she would brush her doll's hair. But she would brush it so hard and so often that inevitably she ended up brushing the doll's head off. That was like a cathartic moment where the pressure finally lifted off her shoulder. That's why, even as an adult, whenever Mr. Gone comes close to telling her everything, Julie, who's overwhelmed, cuts his head clean off. But that's how Julie's dealing with everything. Sarah, on the other hand, is spiraling horribly. Her home life is not fun, and everything is practically imploding. She's going to Julie for help, but Julie isn't able to give her any help because Julie herself is going through her own arc. In the middle of all this, we get a very interesting issue where Maxx falls asleep on Julie's couch and ends up having dreams where he's inside his favorite cartoon, the Crap-On in a hat. This is basically a Dr. Seuss parody, and it's genuinely an entertaining read. But underneath all of that slapstick horror, if you look closer, you'll realize Maxx is terrified. He's scared of learning who he is. He doesn't want to take the mask off, but he knows he has to take it off because he deserves to know who he truly is. While the Maxx is dealing with all of this, Julie ventures deep into the Outback. The deeper she goes, the younger everything around her becomes. She eventually sees her child self, which, much like her adult self, refuses to give any straight-up answers. Sarah finds this magic clay under the underpass she keeps hanging out at, right? The magic clay tells her to take it to Julie and Max's apartment. Ever since the box has been in the house, there's been a stench around the apartment. Eventually, Julie starts cleaning everything up, and surprise, surprise, we find out that the box actually contains Mr. Gone's head. The Izzes he sent goes out and brings the head back, and Mr. Gone forces a doctor to connect the head to his body so that he can go back to terrorizing everyone the way he usually did. And when the head is revealed, we also learn a new fact about Mr. Gone. Mr. Gone is Sarah's father. With everything that's gone down, Julie finally decides to move away from her apartment. Sarah, who feels horrible for bringing Mr. Gone's severed head into the house, decides to help Julie clean out her house. That's where Sarah finds the shovel that Julie's mom used to kill the rabbit. Julie tells Sarah to throw it away. And finally, we see Julie starting her healing journey. But the Maxx is not ready to listen. He doesn't want Julie to go. So Julie and Maxx have their last conversation, and she leaves without saying goodbye properly on her way out. Julie drops Sarah off, but Sarah's problems don't go away like Julie's. She struggles to accept who she is. Maxx, on the other hand, has a hard time coping with Julie being gone. And it's almost like without her presence, the Outback is starting to crumble. Right as they're coping with what may have gone down between them, Julie returns to the picture again, and she's pregnant. Turns out, while she was away, Julie had been trying to find herself. But really, she was destroying herself even more. And this is where we find out who Maxx is. Maxx is Julie's spirit animal taken form. Everything about Maxx is based on what Julie needed. And how did Maxx come to be? Funny you should ask. So after Julie was brutally raped and left for dead, Julie started to move on with her life. But this incident is what created the Outback in the first place. Then, on a rainy night, Julie hit Dave, a homeless man. Instead of helping him because of her wound, Julie covered him with trash and moved on. What she didn't know is that Mr. Gone was trying to practice his mystical powers, and without meaning to, he accidentally charged the trash that Julie used to hide Dave's body with powers from the Outback. Maxx also sheds his Maxx persona and becomes Dave again, or as close to Dave as he can be. Both of them have things to work on, and they part ways. This would be a really nice ending, right? But this is not where we end. Issue 21 is a notable standalone written by none other than Alan Moore. Yeah, the same man behind The Watchmen and V for Vendetta, that expands the mythology beautifully. Then, picking up 10 years later in Kieth's own hands, Julie and Dave have vanished. Now, our main focus is on Sarah, who's been forced by a welfare reform law to track down Mr. Gone, who's now living at a trailer park under his real name, Artemis Pender. Sarah wants to kill him, but he doesn't look evil at all. And when Sarah speaks with him, Artemis claims that Mr. Gone was a creation of Sarah's own mind, and that he had been looking for her for a really long time. but he didn't know if he'd reached her through the dream world. Obviously, Sarah can't accept that. I can't accept it either. So she leaves. But that night, Sarah dreams of her father. She went back to see him only for him to be shot by CIA agents. But here's the thing. It isn't completely a dream. The CIA agents did come to kill him, but Artie managed to get rid of them. But Sarah thinks he is dead because of her realistic dream. So when she shows up and sees that he's alive, she doesn't know how to react. So she leaves again. We spend some more time with Sarah and find out that she has a roommate named Steve. Steve is a would-be psychic, so he keeps trying to eat nicotine candy to activate his powers. So yeah, basically he's the comedy relief of this comic. And finally, we meet Norbert. Who's he? He's a homeless man who's actually Sarah's spirit animal. He's her Maxx. Even though Sarah at first is very creeped out by Norbert and his existence, eventually she accepts that her Outback and her Maxx exist. We also meet the giant murder-happy banana slug known as Iago. Iago escaped from Sarah's Outback with his murder list, and that list has Sarah and Julie's names on it. So basically, Iago is like a black Isis, but Sarah has more important matters to deal with, such as what is up with her father and why is he married to Gaynor, his fourth wife, who accepts him knowing everything about his past. The man who terrorized us in the first arc is gone. Apparently, Mr. Gone tried to kill himself, and when he learned that his connection to the Outback made him basically immortal, he just gave up his evil ways. But the guilt of all this evil does not allow Artie to rest easy. Now, from the very first arc, we're told that Sarah was given a bunch of cassette tapes by Artie. Sarah had even considered listening to them, but when she finally does, the story we know so far becomes even more heartbreaking. So we find out that Artemis was actually born into abuse. He was sexually assaulted as a child by his aunt and a male babysitter, but then he was blamed for everything. So, because of this kind of experience at a very formative age, Artie started to fear and hate women. The first wife he had was a drug addict who killed their child. The second wife was an alcoholic who repeatedly abused him. His third wife was Tilly, Sarah's mom. And while married to her, he traveled to Australia to study Aboriginal regions and find out about the Outback. Using the powers, he became Mr. Gone. And that's how he had been releasing his steam. The point of this reveal is not to excuse Gone, because there's no way to excuse his actions. The point is that we now know what happened to Artie was bad and it was real, and because Artie didn't get the help he needed, he pushed the trauma down the line. He victimized several people, and now the trauma runs through Sarah. And because of his powers, the CIA is now hunting him and sending people after him. So Artie has no choice but to keep his head down and make sure he can survive by making amends with his victims. Now, this is definitely not a redemption in any way, shape, or form, but Sarah recognizes him. Sarah understands where she comes from because up until now, she had no idea who she was. Finally, she acknowledged her origin, and with that, she was able to access powers in her that she had inherited from Gone. With this knowledge, Sarah faces off against Iago. She realizes just how real everything has been, and now she has to deal with it. But she can't do it by herself, and Gone knows that. Gone looks for Dave and tells him that Julie is in danger, which isn't a lie because Julie was attacked by Iago and lost her fingers. And she did so because she was trying to keep Mark, her son, safe from Iago. So, with danger lurking this close around her, Julie tells Dave to tell Mark that she's dead, but Mark does not believe it. But we don't have time for all that. We have to fight Iago. So, Gone gives Dave his max powers. And finally, everyone assembles together. They work together to save Julie from Iago, and Norbert manages to cut Iago open, defeating him. Once this battle is over, we find out that time itself is coming apart. They're actually living in a bubble, and in order to get out of everything, they need emotional resolution from everyone. As the bubble begins to pop, one by one, each character starts to disappear from the shared reality. Every character has their own dream, and finally, the series ends with every character being reborn in a new reality. In Julie's Outback, Gone gets to go back to Sarah and be a good father. Julie finally accepts her role as the Jungle Queen and tells Maxx to let Gone rest in her Outback. But in the new reality, Mr. Gone is now a professor, and Dave is a janitor at the school. Julie and Mark are living in better conditions. It's not a big huzzah moment, I know, but this ending is so much better than where we started out, right? After 35 issues, the comic finally ends.
Great. Where the heck am I now?
The MTV series. If you're someone who doesn't like reading comics, that's fine. The animated series that came out in 1995 is actually a very faithful adaptation of the comic. This series aired as part of MTV's Oddities programming block between April and June, with Kieth and Messer Loebs in the loop and Greg Vanzo as the director. And if you don't know what MTV Oddities was, well, it was essentially MTV's little quarter for animation that had no business being on mainstream television. Aeon Flux lived there too. So, right off the bat, you get a sense of the kind of company the Maxx was keeping. You need to understand that this was not Saturday morning cartoon territory. No way. And the show looks like something else entirely. The animation style is genuinely hard to describe if you haven't seen it. What Vanzo did was take Sam Kieth's actual artwork, everything starting from the panels, the line work, the compositions, and animate directly on top of them. So there are moments where the screen just holds a single panel in the way a comic would, and then suddenly something moves within it. The CGI sequences layered on top of that actually add this strange, slightly uncomfortable texture to the Outback scenes especially, which is exactly the feeling those scenes are supposed to give you. It feels like watching someone else's dream and you're not entirely sure if you're supposed to be there. The first episode drops you right in where the comic does, and we see Maxx trying to stop a mugging, getting arrested for his trouble, and Julie bailing him out like she's done 100 times before. Episodes 2 and 3 escalate quickly, with Mr. Gone gaining the upper hand against both Maxx and Julie, and you start to feel just how dangerous he really is. By episode 4, Maxx is already jumping between worlds trying to piece together Julie's backstory. And episode 5 brings Sarah in, introduced here as a struggling writer whose stories are slowly pulling her into Maxx and Julie's orbit. One of the most quietly effective episodes is episode 7, where Maxx falls asleep on Julie's couch and dreams he's inside his favorite cartoon. It's funny on the surface, but underneath it, he's genuinely terrified of finding out who he really is. The show doesn't spell it out, it just lets it sit there. The series covered everything from issue 1 through issue 11, and it won an Annie Award for it, which, if you ask me, is good. It deserved that. Where the show and the comic differ is in the 13th and final episode. Mr. Gone has already revealed the full weight of Julie's backstory. Julie understands the connection between the Outback and her own past, and she parts ways with Maxx. But in doing so, she actually frees him to discover his own Outback. It's not a clean ending. I don't think it was supposed to be either. But there is something quietly hopeful about that in the comic, with all its extra issues, which takes it much longer to arrive at. Sadly, we do not get to see the rest of the comic adapted because MTV canceled the show quite early. Nobody really has a clean answer for why. My guess? The subject matter was probably a bit too heavy for the people holding up the budget. But here's the thing. Cancellation is also why the show has the reputation it does. There's something about a piece of work that ends before it should that keeps people talking. Decades later, people still bring up this show. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And it treated its audience like adults. And that's still rare enough to remember. The other stuff. Action figures, spin-offs, and legacy. While the main series was still running, seeing how popular it was, of course, McFarlane had to get into this. So, Todd McFarlane produced a line of Maxx action figures through McFarlane Toys. And with how iconic Maxx is, there was no way anyone could have mistaken it for anything else. The figures understandably sold well, and that also popularized the comic. While the series was in its mid-20s issue-wise, a new companion series called Friends of Maxx came out. It ran for 3 issues, and it introduced us to Dude, Mickey, and Glory, basically other characters than Maxx. Some of these characters actually show up in the 13th and 3rd story issues of the main series, because Kieth started to merge both storylines. Say what you want, in my eyes this was a good move. By doing this, Kieth was able to flesh out the other characters that have their own important beats without taking away from the main characters that we'd been following. In December 1995, a Gen 13 The Maxx crossover was published with Messer Loebs as the writer. So yeah, Windstorm's teen superhero team and the Maxx were briefly connected. Sadly, this didn't become a regular occurrence because this was one of those commercially viable ideas of the era that didn't become a permanent detour. But it's definitely entertaining to see our boy Maxx deal with the superheroes. Then we move forward to 2018. About 20 years after the main series ended, we get Kieth back at Maxx again, with a 5-issue crossover with Batman. Kieth wrote and drew the whole thing himself, and it's published by IDW in collaboration with DC Comics. Who would have thought that we would see our purple-clad figure with the Dark Knight? I sure didn't. But this wasn't an unwelcome surprise, you know? The Maxx, given how delirious he seems, was brought into Arkham Asylum for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Batman, who's investigating this villainous Dr. Disparu, eventually comes across the Maxx. He kind of has to because Disparu wires him, the Maxx, and the other inmates together, and Gotham City slowly starts to bleed in with the Outback. So, without any other choice, Batman and the Maxx are forced to travel together through Batman's mental landscape to save both the city and reality. The series, as you can guess, really worked out well. Because let's be real, both Outback and Arkham Asylum are the places where the line between inner life and outer reality blurs together. Batman is literally the man who's defined by his psychological architecture. So of course it makes sense that he would have an interesting Outback, you know? This was Kieth's last major work on the Maxx before his health started to take a turn for the worse. The movie that almost happened. I don't think anyone who grew up with Channing Tatum and Magic Mike or Step Up really thought that he would be a comic nerd. I mean, I sure didn't. But as luck would have it, he is. And in November of 2019, trade reports confirmed that he was developing a live-action film adaptation of The Maxx, with Sam Kieth on board as a producer. Then, in January of 2024, Tatum took to Instagram himself to confirm the news, calling The Maxx one of his childhood loves, and saying he really wanted to bring it to the big screen, because this comic book was truly ahead of its time. At the same time, we also got more news that production is proceeding, with Crystal Moselle on board as the director. But as of now, we don't know how far the movie is into production, other than it's going smoothly, as Tatum has stated on his socials. I hope we can finally see the Maxx on the big screen, because it's one of those experiences that is best enjoyed on a big screen. Kieth's later years and final work. Maxx ended in 1998, and after that, Kieth stepped away from the mainstream comics for a while. He did come back in 2001 with Zero Girl for DC, but it wasn't as crazy as the Maxx. He also did 4 Women, where he explored trauma and survival in a way that was very reminiscent of the Maxx. He then moved on to a Hulk Wolverine miniseries for Marvel in 2002, followed by Arkham Asylum Madness. But as his health deteriorated, he started to pull away from public life more and more. Even though he's gone, everyone knows that Kieth was visually unlike anyone else. He's left behind a work that is sure to move anyone to the core if they're willing to open their mind and heart to new experiences. If you want to start the Maxx because you've never heard of it, or because you want to enjoy the ride once more, you should start with the 1993 Image Comics run, and work your way from there. And if you'd rather watch, you should get your hands on the animated series. Sam Kieth may not have been the only comic artist who gave us a bunch of work, but he is one of those comic artists who gave us quality. He made things that left a mark on the readers. When I first read The Maxx, I was so interested in the story, but it was so confusing. I admit I was a bit too young to be reading Maxx at the time. As I've grown up, I've developed a fondness for The Maxx. I like the way Kieth gave us the plot, piece by piece, by giving us everything we need to know without holding things back just because it would be fun. I loved the reveal that Uncle Artie, Mr. Gone, and Sarah's father are all the same man, and how this trauma is what started a chain, directly or indirectly, for all of our main characters. Sam Kieth may be gone, but his work still holds true, and much like Gone, it is immortal. Rest easy, Sam. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this video, give us a like and ring that bell icon, and let us know what you guys want us to cover next. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!